Greetings to you all. My name is Benjamin Ferencz, and I'm speaking to you from Delray Beach, Florida, in February 2016. I will soon be entering my 97th year. I was a combat soldier in World War II. I was assigned to the headquarters of General Patton. When we landed on the beaches at Normandy and crossed the Rhine on a pontoon bridge and fought in every battle, including the final Battle of the Bulge, where the 101st Airborne Division was trapped by a surprise attack, a last-minute attack by German troops. So I have seen the war in action, and I have also seen and gotten to know the perpetrators of crimes. No one can ever tell me to my face that there was no Holocaust, because I was an eyewitness to the segments of the Holocaust. One of my assignments from General Patton's headquarters was to go into the concentration camps as they were being liberated by the American Army, and there to collect evidence of the crimes. The scene is quite indescribable. Dead bodies all over the floor, some of the inmates who could still move, pursuing the SS, trying to flee from the camp. Some of them caught, beaten to death by inmates and burned alive in the crematoria, where bodies were stacked like cordwood, starving inmates waiting to be burned, so their ashes could be used as fertilizer. The gold teeth, whatever they had in their mouth, was pulled out. Their hair was stripped from their heads to use as stuffing for mattresses. The fat from the bodies as they melted in the crematoria was converted into soap, and the ashes were used as fertilizer. Those were scenes that I personally witnessed as a combat soldier in the American Army. Your teachers are now trying to explain this to young children who are with their parents serving in the military in Germany. I understand that you will be viewing this in courtroom number 600. I was in courtroom 600 as the chief prosecutor for the United States in the biggest murder trial in human history. I accused 22 high-ranking SS officers, that's for the elite Nazis, of murdering in cold blood over 1 million people, including hundreds of thousands of children. The victims were killed and murdered simply because they didn't share the race, the religion, or the ideology of their executioners. That was my first case as a lawyer. I had graduated from the Harvard Law School and gone directly into the Army because we were at war. And I recognized how horrible it was to kill innocent people for such reasons. Obviously, that had some traumatic effect on my subsequent life, because I spent all of my time thereafter trying to prevent such horrors from happening again. That was no easy task, because we have all been raised in generations glorifying war-making. War-making was the way to power and riches. In modern war, however, war-making is only the way to death for most of the participants, or many of the participants. The Nuremberg trials declared that aggression was the supreme international crime because all the other crimes are committed in the course of war. As a soldier, I can assure you that is correct. I knew the mass murderers. They were intelligent, well-educated people. The leaders whom I selected as my defendants were all people which had doctor degrees or high-ranking. Many of them were generals and some were PhDs. Nevertheless, they were able to carry out the cruelest and most inhumane actions imaginable. Why? How is it? These were questions that went through my own mind, and I asked them the questions. And the answers I got were not persuasive. They said they were acting under superior orders. Hitler knew that they were going to be attacked by the Russians, and therefore they were acting in self-defense and preempting that attack by the Russians by attacking first. That is no excuse. One cannot assume that a neighbor who has a gun is planning to attack him, and therefore it justifies going across the street and killing his wife and his children and his grandchildren and his grandma. And the judges so held. All 22 of my defendants were convicted, and 13 were sentenced to death. I was sitting in room 600 as each defendant was brought up on a little elevator. It's the closet door to your left if you're facing where the wall where the judges sat. They'd come up in this little lift. The door would open, a sliding door, would step out, put on the earphones, and they would hear, for the crimes of which you have been convicted, this tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. They would nod, take off the earphones, step back, the doors would close, and they would drop down back into the basement where the prison was. Then minutes later, another one would come up, open the door. For the crimes of which you've been convicted, this tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. Boom. It was very dramatic. It was no cause for jubilation on my part, although it was a record-breaking trial, because I rested the prosecution's case in 2 days, relying strictly on their own reports from the front. The top secret reports they sent back to headquarters describing how many Jews they had killed in which towns and how many others they had killed, giving the name of the commanders. So it was a relatively easy trial, and it was, I say, my first case, which was assigned to me because there was nobody else around. They had already been assigned to other cases. What does it tell us? It tells us many things. First of all, that crime is committed by individuals. It's not committed by an organization. There are people who give the orders. There are people who carry out the orders. If it's obvious that the orders are criminal, if they're killing, for example, as they did, thousands of children, one shot at a time, no one can say there's any excuse for that, making it lawful under any theory. Those who were engaged in it were properly sentenced and sentenced to death. Now, the German public was not generally aware of the details because they kept them fairly secret. It was well known in the United States and among those who planned the trials that Germany intended to kill all of the Jews. Hitler made no secret of that. He said so in every speech. It was written in his book, Mein Kampf, My Battle. How they did it, that they would use gas chambers, or that they would execute them in the fields, or whatever other means they devised, was not generally known. But it's no excuse to say, well, we didn't know the particulars, to hide behind the lame excuse that we couldn't do anything about it, and we just didn't know. The evidence was there for everyone to see in the Nuremberg trials. They were open. All the records were published. You can also see confirmation of it. If you ever get to Berlin, there's a room in a place called the Wannsee, a little villa, where they have the minutes of the meeting, which was entitled Endlösung der Judenfrage, the final solution to the Jewish question. There they had leading Nazis sitting around a table deciding where are all the Jews located, in which countries, Romania, Hungary, and so on, and how do you go about eliminating, killing all of them? And how do you have to plan to build new railroad lines? You have to build extermination factories and so on. All laid out very clearly in advance what they intended to do. So there we are. What can you do about it? Well, how is it possible that a civilized country like Germany would tolerate that kind of criminal behavior. Well, they didn't know the details, I say, but they could see the Jews were disappearing. They knew what the policy was, and yet they did nothing. And the people who justified it were not villains. War makes murderers out of otherwise decent people, and that's forgotten. These defendants that I chose because of their high rank and their education, I'm sure they were kind to their cats and dogs. I would not hesitate to direct their troops to shoot the infant while the mother carried the baby, because you could save ammunition that way. So these are all horrors of war, and I've decided to only real answer to that is to eliminate war making itself. Now you may say, eliminate war making, it's never been done. Of course it's never been done, but nothing new has ever been done before either. It is possible to do what is conceived to be impossible today. For example, we have our Constitution, a great American Constitution, provided that women had no right to vote and women could not own property. Today, your teachers are women, they're running for president, and so that has changed. And I was raised in poverty. I was an immigrant boy, came from Middle Europe. My parents had no training, no money, no skills. They had two little children. I was one of them. And we lived in a cellar in Hell's Kitchen in New York, a heavy crime area. And I decided I would spend my life trying to eliminate crime. And the biggest crime of all, of course, was aggressive war. So I wrote many books on the subject, and I was very disappointed when the United States actually blocked any action on that. And they blocked it on really a phony excuse, saying a crime couldn't be defined. Well, the order from the United Nations was given 70 years ago. And don't tell me for 70 years, all those meetings that I sat through, hundreds of meetings with hundreds of lawyers, they were unable to define the word aggression. They didn't want to define it because they didn't want to tie their hands. And why not? Well, America is a great democracy, and there are many people, particularly conservative people, who believe that if you have the power, use it. Wars are inevitable, therefore you strike your enemy with whatever power you have, and if you're the most powerful, that will maintain peace. What we have to do is to change the way people think about war and peace. They must recognize that compromise is not cowardice and it's not weakness. It's a necessity under many circumstances. We have a small minority in the United States which believes that war is the only answer. We have the power, and therefore we don't need to compromise with anybody. But that's a point of view which will not prevail, because the people who commit what we call crimes are people who are so dedicated to their own cause, whether it be nationalism or religion or economic condition, that they are prepared to kill and to die for their cause. They are not stopped by a threat of any kind. You have to change the way they think and the way we respond to that. Conservatives are entitled to have their point of view heard. They're entitled to be respected, but you don't have to accept it if you see that the end result of that is misery and suffering on the part of countless numbers of innocent people. So I hope that the teachers will be able to simply teach the young children who are there now, the children of people in the military service, that the best thing we can do for them is to prevent war making. The first victims in war are the military themselves. I have told them when I've lectured at West Point and the Air Force Academy and elsewhere that the reason I do what I'm doing is because I don't like to see all these nice young people coming home in body bags. And I don't like to see them coming home with parts missing. If you have a war, that's what you'll have. Also, there's never been a war without rapes. There's never been a war without atrocities of all kinds. And they lead then to the desperation that we see in places like Guantanamo, where the soldiers don't know what to do to get a correct answer from a prisoner who they know is lying to them, and so they use methods which are indescribable, cruel, and illegal. And that also happens in all armies. So the real answer is, can't you eliminate war? and I think you can. When you recognize how dangerous it is today, when from cyberspace you can cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth. Several nations have that power, not only the United States. The Russians and the Chinese certainly have that power. So it's a different world, and we have to think differently. You can't think in the old-fashioned terms of rules of war. So it's be the new generation with all your new computers and with all of your new gadgets to recognize that law is always better than war. And I give you a three-word solution: law, not war. If you could accept that, you'd have enough money saved to send all the kids to college. You'd have enough money to take care of the refugees. You'd have enough money to take care of the housing needs and the other needs of people who are still deprived in all countries of the world. So law, not war, should be your slogan. And I always try to give young people three pieces of advice. 1, never give up. 2, never give up. 3, it's up to you. I wish you all the best of luck. Goodbye.